All right, everybody, it looks like they're getting underway in Indianapolis. Let's listen in.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning. Indianapolis was revisited by the scourge of gun violence that has killed far too many in our community and in our country. Although we will learn more about this case in the coming days and in the coming weeks, no piece of information will restore the lives that were taken. Who escaped with their lives, but who will now bear the scars and endure the memories of this horrific crime. What we are left with this morning is grief. Grief for the families of those killed, grief for the employees who have lost their coworkers, and grief for the many Americans struggling to understand how tragedies like this continue to occur. In trying to understand this, what we are left with this morning is grief. Grief for the families of those killed, grief for the employees who have lost their coworkers, and grief for the many Americans struggling to understand how tragedies like this continue to occur. I want to thank the first responders who arrived in trying to understand this.
Everybody, the signal coming out of this live press conference is not very good. I'm working to try to get you a better feed, but I just want to let you know there are a ton of media in there. So that is why
resignation.
The feed isn't that great.
All accounts, these women and these men acted heroically, caring for victims and families and bringing order to a chaotic environment. I'll close by saying this. Indianapolis is a resilient community. Last night was a devastating blow, and its impact will be felt by our community for days and weeks to come. But in times of despair, I know that our residents will rally together and help one another make it through. The eyes of the nation are on Indianapolis today in ways that we would never have hoped for. And for those who only know of this city, what they have learned when we are hosting major events on a global stage, they would be forgiven for simply believing that the people of Indianapolis are known for kindness shown to those who come to visit. What they cannot see in those moments, and what is difficult for us who live here to see in these moments, is that this spirit of generosity and radical love is shared not just by our residents, but between our residents. It is what makes this a special place that we are proud to call home. In times of triumph and in times of tragedy. It is what gives us the strength to see through the darkness and find the light of love that exist within each of us. It is what gives us hope. And no crime of passion or act of hate can take that away from us. Not today, not ever. I'll turn it over now to the Chief of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, Chief Randall Taylor.
So this morning, for the third time since January, our community woke up to news of a senseless crime that will not soon leave our memory. This is unacceptable for Indianapolis. Our IMPD officers went towards danger, as they typically do, and when they arrived on the scene, they found something that really no one should see. We've all been shaken by this heinous act. I will tell you, the one thing that drew me to Indianapolis when I first came here in '93 was for such a big city to have such a small town feel and heart. Our IMPD chaplains have been on the scene since early this morning, providing care and comfort and support to the families of the victims. My heart is broken over the lives that were lost. FedEx is a major employer in this city. If you ask around, there's numerous people, myself included, that had family and friends that work for this great company, and they have built bonds, whether they work there for a short time or a long time. I can only imagine what the victims, the surviving victims, and their coworkers are going through. But we're truly with them. The crime scene remains active. IPD, along with public safety partners, will continue to work at the scene for as long as it takes to ensure a thorough investigation is complete. You'll soon hear from Deputy Chief Craig McCart, who will share what we know to this point, but that information will be limited. I can share a few things with you, though. I know the first responders did an incredible job. You more than likely will hear stories of their bravery as this develops. I know it's going to take time for us to learn more about what happened last night, and I don't honestly know that we'll ever really know all the ins and outs to why this occurred, but we'll certainly do our best. But I do know our community stands together. That was evident through services that were rendered by companies here like Indigo, Holiday Inn, and also with our law enforcement partners. I'd like to thank personally Superintendent Doug Carter and the State Police for their help, and also our other federal partners who are always by our side. Now I'll introduce one of those partners, FBI Special Agent in Charge, Paul Keenan.
Thank you, Chief. As the Chief said, my name is Paul Keenan. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the FBI Indianapolis Field Office. First and foremost, I offer my sincere condolences on behalf of the FBI to the family and loved ones of the victims of the senseless violence that took place last night. While we mourn the devastating loss of their lives, we are dedicated to honoring their memory through a meticulous investigation. FBI Indianapolis is part of this community, and we stand with our friends and our neighbors to condemn this violent act that has impacted so many. I stand here today with my partners because whenever there is a tragedy such as this, the FBI surges resources to assist our law enforcement partners in addressing those immediate needs. FBI personnel are assisting the crime scene, conducting interviews, assisting on the search of the suspect's home, and will provide any technical expertise requested by the IMPD. Many of you have already asked what the motive of this shooting was, and with less than 12 hours since the shooting, it would be premature to speculate on that motivation. I can tell you that there is no further threat, and updates will continue to be shared as there are more details. We're grateful for our strong partnerships with the law enforcement in Indiana. As we have done in other cases, the FBI will dedicate all available resources to follow every lead and use all investigative capabilities to seek justice and bring closure for the victims' families. Next up, I'd like to introduce Deputy Chief Craig McCart from the IMPD. Thank you.
Good morning. First of all, I'd just like to reiterate some of what's already been said. Recognize this horrible tragedy that our community has experienced this morning, and certainly our condolences go out to the victims, their families, their friends, their loved ones, and our thoughts and prayers are certainly with all those who were affected by this violence, and we know that that's far-reaching, that this violence is far-reaching. And so we keep all of them in our thoughts as we move forward. So I will quickly go through how this investigation has progressed. And again, bear with me. There's going to be a lot that I am not able, a lot of questions that you may have after I'm done that I may not be able to answer. We're still working on those answers. This investigation is very much still in its infancy, but I will answer what I can after we're done. So late last night, officers received a run of shots fired to the FedEx facility. When officers arrived, they found a very chaotic and active crime scene. They found several victims injured and several victims deceased, as well as the suspect who was deceased as well of an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. Detectives were summoned to the scene. We began interviews with the many witnesses that were on scene. Crime Lab responded, and we began to process that crime scene, and that continues now, and we're still several hours from being able to complete that at this time, so there's still a lot of work to do out there. Our victim assistance and chaplain's office also responded to the scene to assist with the witnesses, victim families, and Indigo was at the scene to help us transport employees, witnesses, and families to the family reunification site, which was a nearby hotel. And so we continue to work with those employees and families as we work through identification and speaking with those families. Before I open anything up for questions, I want to recognize the work that's being done out there as we speak by our detectives and the help that we have received from other law enforcement agencies. I'd like to also give a thank you to the state police. They were a huge help last night as their detectives worked right alongside with ours. They allowed us to use this facility not only for this event, but for interviews last night. Indigo, as I've already said, our federal partners who have been right beside us throughout this investigation as well. We will now work alongside the Coroner's office as we work through victim identification, and so we, again, just a big thank you to all those folks, the victim assistance unit, the chaplain's office. We couldn't have done this without the help that we've received today, and certainly our crime lab techs have been out there all night as well. So if there are specific questions now, I will open it up for those questions, and again, I will try to answer whatever I can.
Just ask, I know you can't give much information at this point about motive, but what can you tell us about the suspect?
I can really tell you very little, and the reason is we are still working to identify everybody that is still on scene there. So we are not able to make positive identification of the suspect, so there's really not much that we can say about him until we have made positive identification.
Just a quick follow-up. Were any of the eyewitnesses that you were able to talk to, did any of them say anything about the suspect? Did they recognize this person?
So what we did find preliminarily from the interviews that were conducted was that this suspect came to the facility. And when he came there, he got out of his car and pretty quickly started some random shooting outside the facility. There was no confrontation with anyone that was there. There was no disturbance. There was no argument. He just appeared to randomly start shooting, and that began in the parking lot, and then he did go into the building, into the facility for a brief period of time before he took his own life.
What connection, if any, at this point does the shooter have to the FedEx facility or any of its employees?
We don't know that. Again, that's difficult to determine until we make positive identification. So we're certainly working with the FedEx organization in trying to establish all those connections, but we just can't do that yet.
Hey, Craig, if I can be clear, you're saying you don't have a firm identification of the suspect, but the special agent says they're assisting with the search of his house.
And that's accurate. I mean, we have an idea. We have some other leads that led us to that location. But again, until we make positive identification, along with the coroner's office, we're not going to obviously identify anybody.
But there is a search going on of somebody's house.
There's all kinds of things going on in the investigation, but yes, that is one of them.
Okay, a search of the individual you think who is the shooter in this case.
Potentially, yes. Potentially, yes.
How many weapons recovered? How many shots fired?
I can't tell you that yet. Again, the crime lab is still out there collecting all that evidence, and we can't determine those things until they've completed.
Did your witnesses tell you that perhaps at FedEx or the security personnel or off-duty law enforcement personnel at the site yesterday had any indication that perhaps this trouble was going to occur or somebody was going to come back with a gun?
No. We're still working with FedEx security for anything that might have been an indicator that this was going to happen, but right now we don't have those ties. And again, Russ is still very early, still in the infancy, so we're still doing those interviews. We're still working closely with FedEx to find those things out.
Was the shooting done when police arrived?
Yes, my understanding is that everything, by the time that officers entered, that the situation was over, that the suspect took his life very shortly before officers actually entered the facility.
How long do you think the incident lasted?
It's hard to say exactly, but the estimates that we have heard are just a couple minutes, that it did not last very long.
And you can't confirm that the suspect is an employee?
No, we cannot confirm that yet.
How many people were in the building at the time?
You know what? That I can't tell you that. That would be a question that someone from the FedEx organization would have to answer. I don't know the number. I don't know that number right now.
How many were transported to the hospital?
So what we have right now is that there were 5 that were transported from the scene. 4 of those had suffered what appeared to be non-fatal gunshot wounds, and then there was another injury of some sort that was a personal sort of injury that was transported as well.
Several employees have said that FedEx policy is that employees take their cell phones into the facility, and they fear that that will delay getting you guys there. Was there any kind of delay in getting you there?
No, I think that we were contacted very quickly once things started happening. Now, what I have heard is that part of the frustration in family notification has been due to a lot of these employees did not have cell phones. As they flee the building and get transported to other places, they're without their cell phones, and so they had a hard time getting with families. So that was certainly frustrating for those employees as well as their families.
Is there surveillance video of the incident?
We're checking for surveillance video, and certainly one would think in a large facility like that at some point there's going to be some video that we're able to obtain.
Did any witnesses indicate to you that they thought maybe there was another employee who attempted to retrieve a firearm and essentially stop this incident from occurring?
I heard that kind of anecdotally, but I have not heard that was reported to law enforcement to this point. Now, we're doing lots of interviews still, so I'm It's not accurate, but I have not heard it from people within my own organization.
Was there a shift change going on, which is why there would have been folks in the parking lot? I'm trying to understand why that time of night.
We haven't determined that yet, but I know there are some places where I think a lot of the employees take breaks and lunches and things like that out in that area as well. So, and it could have been a shift change as well. I just don't have that answer right now.
The scope of the investigation, the facility is quite massive. Not asking for graphic detail, but you said it's going to take a couple of hours. Can you give us an inside look as to what are you doing in that building? What are you collecting? And then also, sir, follow-up question, how many people have you interviewed or do you plan on interviewing as part of the investigation? Thank you.
So first, it's not just inside the building where we continue to work and process the crime scene, because as I indicated, it started outside the building. So crime lab personnel have a painstaking process, a very organized process of documenting all the evidence that's there on the scene, and that will start with diagrams and pictures and videos, and then the actual physical collection of any evidence that's on the scene. So that has to be done in there's a big area. Like I said, we started outside and then we went into the facility. So all that's going to take a while.
Well, in response to the question, I would point to the fact that just last week I signed on to a letter from over 150 mayors around the country asking for the United States Senate to consider legislation that would expand background checks to be required when firearms are transferred between private citizens, and to close the Charleston loophole, which allows federally licensed firearm dealers to transfer guns to customers before an adequate background check is completed. So the fact that I joined with 150 other mayors in asking the federal legislature to do that at least indicates what I would like to see done legislatively. My concern about the Indiana General Assembly is I believe they only have 3 or 4 days left in this particular session, but I certainly will make it clear to our governor and to the legislative leadership where I stand on these issues.
Mr. Mayor, you were in contact with the White House, contacted you. Can you give us, again, not disclosing any privileged conversation, share with us what was that conversation like? Has the White House promised or offered any services or resources to Indianapolis?
Well, as most people know, the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States is a North Central high school grad from Indianapolis, Indiana, so it was not at all unusual that he would reach out to me. Basically, the offer was, anything you need, Mayor, we stand ready to assist. It was not a direct communication. It was just text messaging, and I, of course, responded thanking him and told him that we would keep him made aware of the progress of the investigation, and if the White House was able to do anything to support, I'm certainly not hesitant to ask for it.
Mr. Mayor, cities are always looking for resources from the federal government. If there are things that you could ask the White House, what would you need? What resources could the men and women of federal police and the other agencies that are under your purview, what would you ask them at this moment in time?
Well, we're always deeply appreciative of federal support, whether that come by way of dollars or otherwise. And frankly, the city of Indianapolis is grateful. For example, the CARES Act provided $168 million. Many of those dollars went to our first responders last year. According to the American Rescue Plan, I believe Indianapolis may very well be receiving over the course of the next 2 years $425 million. And I have no doubt, although we have not made any decisions about how to utilize that money, I have no doubt that that money will also be used for law enforcement and first responder support. So anytime Washington makes the offer, we're very grateful and certainly inclined to accept.
Mayor, how does the community feel from that? This is the third time they're waking up this year alone for Mexico.
Yeah, but I think that the community needs to engage in serious conversations, and not just our community, but I think conversations need to be held around our country. And those conversations should be driven by the extraordinary proliferation of guns and cycles of violence that in 147 instances already this year have plagued communities around our country. And unfortunately for the city of Indianapolis, this is the third mass killing that we have experienced. So the process of healing will take time, but I think healing does depend on meaningful conversations between people about how we stop this cycle of violence that's driven by readily accessible guns. And I certainly intend to lead in that regard.
We've been told that the suspect was allegedly shot and killed himself. So what weapon was found with him? And was that the only weapon you believe was used in this shooting?
So we know that there was, or we believe that there was a rifle involved. We don't have the specifics on the weapon yet, as again, we're still processing that and all that hasn't been collected yet. But we do believe right now that he had a rifle.
Can you talk a little bit about the process for identifying families that's still going on right now and communicating with families? Is this typical procedure, setting up, say, a hotel, and how long might we expect that procedure to take?
So I guess I hesitate to say typical because thankfully we don't do this very often, and I'm sorry that we had to do it today. But yes, we do have our victim assistance counselors. We have our chaplains at a nearby hotel, which is where we took employees to, which is where we had family meet them. Obviously, there are families who are still trying to locate loved ones and family members, so we continue to stand by their side until such time when we can either locate those family members or identify them as a victim that we have on scene.
Describe the weapon as a rifle, sir. Was the weapon in any capacity altered or changed to allow the...
Way too early to, yeah, I mean, at this point, really, it hasn't even been touched as we still document everything, so.
You brought up the suspect's car. Is that under investigation as well? Do you know which car was his?
Oh, absolutely. That's part of the scene. So we're making sure that we have correctly identified the car that we believe that he showed up in, and then absolutely, I mean, we will process that as part of the crime scene.
How many people were shot and killed inside and outside the building? Can you say that?
So I believe that we had four outside and then 4 inside plus the suspect.
Don't they have armed security inside?
That I don't know.
Now, have you been able, you've certainly been able to identify some of these victims so far. Everybody goes in and out of the building has some kind of name tag on. Have you been able to contact any families yet?
We really haven't. I mean, nothing gets moved. Nothing. We don't check wallets. We don't check purses until everything is appropriately documented. So, I mean, there may be some fairly simple ways to identify, and we'll work with the coroner's office to make sure that that's done appropriately with those families. But to this point, we have not identified any family as victims.
So as Indianapolis waits for the names of these people and for the suspect, how long do you think it's going to take before you're going to let their neighbors know what's happened?
That might be a better question for the coroner's office because they make that official identification. But I would think hopefully in the next 24 hours that maybe we can do that.
Have those victims been removed from the site?
Not, I don't believe so. When we came in here, they were still a couple hours away. So, Alfred, you want to address that?
So before you get the podium, what was happening at that time? Were people sorting packages? I mean, can you give us an idea? I mean, I think I know what happens at FedEx, but what were those folks doing before this happened?
You know, again, that's a question that that I'm probably not qualified to answer. That would be best served to ask the FedEx folks. You know, they have some different facilities. Different things happen at different facilities, and I don't specifically know what the folks inside here were responsible for.
How many people were injured, and how many hospitals did you use last night?
So, like I said, I believe we had 5 that were injured, and I can't say with certainty how many different hospitals that they went to. I know I believe we had at least 3, but I'm not certain of that. And I'll let Alfie Ballou, McGinty, I will let her address the victim identification issues, and if you have any questions for her.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Marion County Coroner, Dr. Leandria Sloan, my name is Alfarina McGinty, and we are in the process of conducting our investigation. As has been stated, what we typically have to do is wait until all of the evidence has been collected. We are not able to go onto the scene yet to confirm any identities. What we will do is we will work with the victim's assistants as well as the chaplains at the identified location for the families to reunify those families with the decedents. We will utilize as much information as possible that is on those decedents that are at the scenes to make that positive identification. As you all know, Indiana is very specific in how positive identification can be done, which is identification by a family member, dental, DNA, and fingerprints. And so adhering to all of those measures, we must make sure that the people that are identified on the scene are accurately and appropriately, positively identified. And so that process will take a little bit of time. We have some information so far as to what families are waiting their loved ones to be identified or to turn up somewhere. And so we are going to be working with those families to efficiently and very effectively confirm the positive identification. We are still a number of hours out before we are able to go onto the scene to conduct our investigation, and then after that we will work with the families. Following that process, what we will have to do is we will perform our examinations. We will be calling in additional staff, and so additional resources will be available or need to be available to us for the additional staff to be brought in for those examinations to be done within the next 48 to 72 hours to confirm the actual cause of the death. Any other questions?
Have all the workers who were there last night when it occurred, have they all?
I don't have the information. I don't have the information.
Besides victims?
I don't think there's anyone still there, but I can't say that for sure.
Can you identify the sexes of the victims?
At this time, we have not been able to go onto the scene to do any of that. Preliminarily, what we will do is I will send information to the rest of the investigating team so that that information can be shared as we get updated information on identities, age, race, gender, and those things that are important for the family members and the community to know.
Can you talk about the toll that this is having on your office, specifically as part of the larger public safety family? You've seen a lot of death this year at the hands of mass shootings. Can you just put that in perspective? Because how do you do it?
It is a very difficult job. I've been with the coroner's office for 23 years. I've not seen this capacity in terms of the numbers of mass fatality shootings in a short period of time. It is very disturbing for our entire community. The staff is definitely suffering and is going to need long-term counseling with regard to these types of deaths. It actually has, we've had to pull in all of our 30 staff to conduct these death investigations and to work with the families, because we do still have follow-up information and things that have to be done and shared with the families. It is very time-consuming, so it definitely takes a toll on our staff. And again, we are asking for additional resources so that we will have the capacity to handle these types of death investigations, unfortunately.
More specifically, ma'am, you deal with that almost every day. How is this any different when you're seeing this scope? Can you just explain the difference?
Sure.
I don't do your job. So.
Right. So the scope is pretty significant when you have this number of people. So pulling in all of our staff that are available, calling people from other jobs that have to come in and assist, as well as surrounding county coroners that are able to come in and assist us with these types of investigations. Additionally, we've seen an increase in death investigations in general over the last couple of years. And we are trying to work with our law enforcement partners to understand and address these issues that are causing this increase in death investigations. And so that is something that our staff is definitely has been working through over the last 2 years to be able to handle these things, because it is mentally draining, it is physically draining. We're going to work for literally the next 24 to 48 hours just to give answers to the families. Our first priority is to the families and identifying with the decedent, who the decedent is, as well as determining the cause and manner of death, providing death certificates for those families so that they can move on with their information and things that they need to do with regard to the loss of their loved one. So our hearts definitely go out to those surviving family members that are going to deal with this lifelong tragedy.
Craig, one more. Craig, a question about identification. If we can't identify the suspect and the victim, can we say that everybody who's okay has been identified, reunited with family members, and released?
I think that's a safe assumption, but yet I can't say that for certain. We think that we have reunited families and workers, and certainly all of those who have been treated at the hospital have been reunited with family. But again, I haven't been over there, so I don't want to say for certain that that's the case. But I believe right now that we have.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Good job, Craig. Thank you, sir.
All right, so once again,